We'll call the meeting of the Economic Development Plan Review Committee to order. Beginning at the top of the agenda, we'll start with roll call.
Blessum.
Here.
Feldner.
Here.
Hammer. Howe. Neither.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Pittner.
Here.
Continuing on to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States
of America,
and to
the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Continuing on, we'll look at approving the minutes for the December 6th meeting.
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion at all? Any changes, adjustments? Okay, please call the roll.
Blessum.
Yes.
Feldner.
Yes.
Neither.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Pittner.
Yes.
Okay, we'll continue on to item 4, which is old business. We'll continue with the City of Minot Economic Development Programs presentation. Brian, if you want to take it from there and continue where we left off, which is, I think, the end of the Renaissance Zone discussion, and then continuing on from there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we had to adjourn the last meeting kind of abruptly because we went past the deadline, so I've concluded my presentation on the Renaissance Zone, but are there any questions from the committee before we move on?
So one of the things I'd like to do, just addressing the committee a little bit, as we finish up these programs, what I'd really like to do now is open the floor for us to bring any motions to add on to a list of what we're going to send back to council. And it's not to say that once we decide on it now that it won't be revisited. We'll continue to look at the list and things like that. So what I would ask the committee today is, do we have any adjustments to the program? You know, Paul, you serve on that board. Brian, I'd love to ask you if you've got any thoughts. Harold, you as well, on this program in particular. Are there adjustments that we could take a look at or should take a look at?
Chairman Blessum, I brought some adjustments to this program to the City Council in May, and they were approved, and I have no further adjustments that need to be made at this time.
Okay, Brian, can you talk about those for just a moment?
Yep.
Because there was something that changed in state law that allowed us to do something a little bit different, just to refresh us.
Yes, so the third bullet point on this slide, we added the 8-year property tax benefit for commercial improvements that take place when there's at least a 150% investment in the property's value. So that was the main addition to the Renaissance Zone program in May that was adopted by council.
And was that new law in the last session that allowed us to make that change?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
And then as part of those changes as well, did we adjust the blocks a little bit
Yes,
during that?
yes, Mr. Chairman, we did. We took 2 blocks out of the zone. We took the CTE property out and the property at the southwest corner of Burdick and Broadway. That's the mattress firm store. Those properties had already received benefits or are no longer eligible to receive benefits. So therefore, we added 2 blocks up on North Hill, adding the Vegas Hotel and the Economy Hotel to the Renaissance Zone.
And one of the things that, and I apologize that I didn't do this beforehand because that was my intent as I'm remembering the last meeting. One of the things that I was wondering about is, do you have a sense for any type of data in aggregate for what you would say has been the success of this program? I know we've talked about individual projects, and I think as we look project by project, yeah, you can see some places where, yep, it was worth this before, it's now worth this, the city's seeing this in terms of revenue. How about an aggregate? What's been the effect of doing this on the whole for the taxpayer of the city?
We have not looked at the whole yet. It's something we can certainly look at in 2025 and come back to this committee with some numbers.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact numbers. I need to go back here. We've had 83 completed projects. That's quite a bit of data that we have to go through. But I can work with the city assessor to see what kind of impact that's had on property values in our downtown, and maybe come back to this committee in the near future with some numbers.
Yeah. And I guess, Brian, the thing that would come to my mind then as you look at that type of analysis is, would we have a control group, whether it's in a different part of town or other development or development's the wrong word, other renovation that we know has gone on to determine, is this, I mean, obviously it's going to be a hotbed because that's why we have the zone there.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the whole point, or these are buildings that make sense for that. But we do have other corridors that have had renovations going on. That's the kind of thing that I'd kind of like to understand is, what is this
Certainly.
contributing above what would have naturally happened with the owner of the property itself?
Mr. Chairman, I think a good control group for starting the Renaissance Zone would be the west side of Broadway, that neighborhood there. We recently added those blocks to the Renaissance Zone 3 or 4 years ago. We haven't received any applications, but we can certainly look at the impact that the Renaissance Zone has had on the east side of Broadway and compare it to how the west side of Broadway has progressed over the past 20 years. Okay? I think that'd be a good comparison.
All right. Okay, committee, any other thoughts on Renaissance Zone? Any other adjustments? The one thing that I will throw out that we discussed last time was, in my mind, should there be a regular interval for looking at the blocks? And it sounds like the committee looks at that on a regular basis as well. Is that fair to say, Paul, if you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if a regular, it's been discussion in the past, I don't know, but I that's one of the notes I have is just, one of the items was the frequency of zones, right? Well, how often we look at them again. But with that, I think another point that I have is the marketing of zones. Make sure that people are aware of these programs that are within these zones. There's some people that don't know that these exist, and we just kind of just kind of cast a wide net and hopefully we catch a fish. Maybe even some effort put into the marketing of these zones, people that are in the property, so that they're aware of this benefit, so that if they are thinking about these projects or even thinking about selling these properties. Sometimes this lends itself to the marketability. Being in the real estate industry, there are deals that I know of, and I can give you examples of, that are attributed to those properties actually selling in order to be invested in and renovated because of these programs that are in place. So I think even marketing these and getting the word out is an important factor if we do continue these.
Other thoughts? Anyone? Okay.
I do-
Brian,
I do have a quick
George?
question.
Yep.
This is just maybe for my own knowledge. You'd said for an 8-year, abatement deal, you have to invest, what is it, 150%?
That is correct.
So is that something that, I'm just real simple math, $1 million property, you have to put $1.5 million into it, correct? To make that work. Does that get determined, who determines that value? Is it appraised by the city or is it an outside appraiser? Or?
The city assessor
Okay.
reviews all the applications.
Okay.
And they will also conduct the inspections to make sure the work has been done properly.
Okay, perfect. That was the only question I had, just for clarification for myself. Thank you.
Paul?
And another thing too, Brian, what are some of there was changes made at the legislative session. There are some of those changes that we do not implement, like a second crack at the Renaissance Zone after 30 years. I think some of our oldest ones are 22 years old, 20 years old. They wouldn't be eligible for another 8 years. But if there are ways to improve this program, if it continues to exist in the way, shape, or form that it does, I think looking at those as that Renaissance Zone board with maybe recommendations, because they do have to go to the other taxing entities as well, but whether or not we want to, some of those projects, and to give some background on that, right? Some of these properties were done 22 years ago, and they weren't nearly at $150,000 or 150% of the investment. It was maybe a little bit of flooring, a little bit of paint. It was, $10,000, and they got a 5-year tax abatement. So it's nice to see these levels of investment need to be regulated, so that they're not just slapping some paint or some plywood, closing up windows. So again, maybe some of those items that we don't take advantage of at the city of Minot and Ward County, but some of those other items that we can implement to further enhance this program
So,
might be worth looking
Mr.
at.
Chairman, if I can respond to that real quick. Alderman Pittner, we received a 5-year extension on our Renaissance Zone, so it will expire in May of 2029. And I'd recommend to this group and to the city council that we add that additional benefit of a second project at that time, because at that point these properties will start will become eligible for a second benefit right around the year 2031 or so. So I would recommend we revisit that 5 years from now.
And for me, it remains to be seen if I'm still on council at that point. But those will be some interesting conversations in my mind, because again, I think I get where you're coming from, Paul. There was some differences, especially back then, and maybe they didn't have access to do more than what they were talking about. But certainly, you know, if we're going to have things like this in place, having them continue to go back to the same set of people also is something we want to keep in mind. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Just to that point, again, those same set of people, it's not tied to the property owner. I know you know that,
Yep.
but just for the public aware, it's not tied to the property owner, it's tied to the property address.
Right.
So it's that, you know, and 20 years ago, people weren't putting elevators in. Now they are putting elevators in, and an elevator probably gets you that 150%,
itself.
150% by itself. So again, some of those bigger ticket items that allow for accessibility and really diversifying some of these properties, I think is a great benefit, so.
Yep.
Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman?
Tyler? Yep.
Question for Mr. Billingsley. Are there any of these blocks that we haven't seen any development in or this program utilized in since inception?
Oh, since the inception, I think every block in the original Renaissance zone, you'll see the brown shaded blocks. Those are the original blocks for the zone. There have been at least one, if not multiple, projects in all those blocks. But there are still properties that have not taken advantage of the program, and that's why those blocks are still in the zone. The blocks highlighted in gray have been taken out of the zone. They've been declared as completed. Either they have used all their benefits up and they're no longer eligible, or they were in flood control areas that have been bought out by the city or will be bought out by the city in the near future. We don't want to incentivize development to happen in an area that we're going to be buying out for flood control.
Sure.
So that's I would the brown blocks are the original blocks. They were created in 2001. Each color code has a different year attached to it, 2006, 2010. You can see how the zone has grown through the years. In recent years, we've gone up North Hill. So the light purple, dark purple blocks were added in 2021 and 2024 respectively.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, one thing I could add here too, and some may view this comment as a positive, some may view it as a negative, but I just want to make sure that it's on the table so everyone's aware. This is one of the few tools that we have that residential use is eligible to utilize as well. Most of our incentives focus on commercial and industrial. This one, if you're in the zone, even if you're a house and you're making improvements, you qualify for it. So it's one of the few things that true homeowners and residents can take advantage of as well.
That is correct. We have had a handful of property owners residential property owners that have applied and received benefits. And that's the first bullet point you see in this slide here. They have to invest 20% of their property's value into the improvements to be eligible for the 5-year benefit.
Brian, to be clear on the available benefits, are these set in state law as minimums? And then do we have the ability to layer on top of that? Say if we wanted to make that residential be 50% as well, is that legal under a city ordinance?
Yes and yes. So yes, they are set in state law. The minimum investment amount on the 8-year benefit is 75%.
Okay.
The county commissioners reviewed that and they passed on a 3-2 vote 150%. They couldn't get the 75% approved. So they adopted the 150%. So that's why we're stuck with having to enforce 150% on the 8-year benefit. So yes, that is a minimum amount, but we can go beyond that as well.
And so just to clarify that then, does that just go before the city, county, and school?
Correct.
Does it not go before the park board?
No, it does
Okay,
not.
Okay.
Nope.
Jordan, did you have something?
I didn't. I just actually, thanks for the clarification on the residential and usage to have it be open. That actually, I appreciate that. That was a question I was going to ask and didn't. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. And Brian, just one other clarification then as well. Today, state law allows for 2 islands, meaning 2 disconnected areas. Right now in the city of Minot, we use 1. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes.
And Paul, if you've got anything to add from the board, if there's been discussion about that or
Yes.
where we would head?
Mr. Chairman, the island that you see in this map is on the far north end of the city. It's the 2 blocks we just added back in May, the 2 hotel properties. We couldn't connect them because we're capped to have 42 blocks available in the city, and these are 42. So we created an island here. We're allowed by state law now to adopt 2 islands. We're only using 1 right now. So in the future, when a block becomes completed, we can vacate it from the zone, and we can use it to connect that island to the main zone. and no longer have the need for an island. So the possibilities there in the future, we can eliminate that island.
And just point of clarification, so the cap of the 42 applies to both islands, so you don't get 42 per area. Between those two islands, you can
42
only,
grand total.
You can only do 42 grand total.
Yep.
So you can do 21 and 21, but you can't do
Actually,
42.
the
and 42.
island is limited to 3 blocks. There's a cap there as well. For islands, are have to be very small. Yeah.
And again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I think that's a tool that the city could use going, in the future. We have these islands. It's nice, again, I understand the idea of having a centralized impact with your central business district and having these downtown. But if we're able to branch out into other areas, other commercial areas around Minot, you think of, East Burdick or Fourth Avenue, there's some of these areas around town where there's a good amount of commercial space out there that's dated that could use a great deal of investment and could easily probably hit those 150% investment marks for a benefit or even if it's a 5-year. I think utilizing those islands as a tool to kind of spread these benefits around the city to spur investment and development, I think would be something wise that the committee looks at. If we have some of these underperforming blocks in some of these areas that aren't being utilized, to shut those down and put them in other corridors of the city, I think would be we could really see some increased activity with the program and spread the benefit around.
Okay, Tyler?
Mr. Chairman, that was kind of my comment to Mr. Billingsley is, as a new individual on the Renaissance Zoning Board, I'm excited to kind of dive in and see some of these areas that haven't been necessarily utilizing this. And to your point, see if we can't spread that into another area and get gentrification in some other areas. So that'll be a task I look forward to taking under.
All right, Justin?
Sorry, I was a few minutes late, so had a little road rage going on the way trying to get here. So, Brian, question for you on you talked about the mattress firm building and the CTE center being taken out, and I guess just for my clarification, so we're also talking about after 30 years, properties may be eligible again. So those properties would not be eligible because they're not included anymore. Is that am I thinking that way correctly?
That's my understanding of how the program works. However, we can always go back and reactivate a completed block in the future.
Okay.
So my hope is that we can get North Hill cleaned up over the next 10 years. And then if we have to come back downtown and reallocate those zones to blocks that are downtown, we can do that.
Okay. So it's not necessarily once a project's done that property's taken out.
Right.
It's just that 42 blocks is being utilized the best we can.
When this program was created, it was intended to be just a one time only and you're done with the program. And now the legislature has reconsidered that. Now they want to allow second projects, again, after 30 years, as Alderman Pittner stated. So we can come back in the future and reallocate those blocks to completed blocks if there's a need to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe a little bit along those lines, Brian, so after we came out of the election, Measure 4 failing, there's been things thrown around. Have you heard any of the thoughts that are coming from the legislature or legislators? I know that there's some question around, should we pull back on some of the incentives to try to remove the sort of I guess maybe the freebies from it and try to level the playing field. Do you get any sense that, or from your colleagues around the state, that anything may change during this session?
I have not heard anything, Mr. Chairman. I know when they adopted the changes to the rules in 2023, it was done by an overwhelming majority. I'm talking like at least 80% of the legislature supported those changes. So I don't expect to see any major changes to the program in 2025, but you never know. I mean, we'll see what happens next year. There could be a different tone from the legislature at that time. But I have not heard anything from any legislators or anybody from the Department of Commerce at the state regarding any major changes to this program at this time.
And so then maybe one final comment from me or question. Brian, Paul, certainly because you've been on there, Tyler, now that you are on there, talk to me about the protections that we would have in that entire process to make sure that whether it's choosing blocks, it's approving projects, all the things that go with that, I just throwing it out there, if I were on a board like that, I would hate to have the opportunity where I could say, well, shoot, there's another accounting firm that could have a chance at this. I'm going to avoid their block. right? All the same things that we want to make sure that the public has a lot of confidence in these types of programs. The nice thing is that there's layers of approval. You got the board, you've got city staff reviewing, you've got the council approving. Do you feel good about that, Paul, from what you've seen over the years?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm the liaison to that board, so I'm not a voting member.
Sure.
But yes, no, I feel confident in, and it comes down to the people that are invested into those boards, and that you know, volunteer, quote unquote, volunteer for those boards. They want to see what's best for the city of Minot. They want to see these projects be successful. And not every project that gets approved gets completed. I think how many projects have we had over the years that are, incomplete? So yeah, we have 12 incomplete or denied projects. And some of those have been pending or have been incomplete since early 2000s. So not everybody that goes through and even gets approved for these programs, crosses the finish line with them for whatever reason. But again, I feel confident in the protections that we have in there. I mean, some of those concerns that you expressed, whether it's trying to thwart your competition or whatnot, that's at every layer of government, and I don't know if anyone can ever fully mitigate that. So.
Yep, Harold?
Mr. Mayor, Brian, if I remember correctly, these applications and the final approval of them also have to be approved by the Department of Commerce, correct?
That is correct. It's a 3-step process. Renaissance Zone Review Board makes a recommendation, and then it goes to City Council where a public hearing is held, and the council will make a decision. If it's approved, then I submit all the paperwork to Bismarck. They review it. If it meets all the program guidelines, then they will issue a letter of approval for both conditional and final approval.
Do you have any examples of applications that have been denied and why they were denied?
The only application that I can recall that was denied, it was years ago, it was for an adult entertainment use in our downtown. And it was denied by the city council, not by the state. That's my understanding. But it was several years ago, long before I was here.
So with that, and I don't know if you were involved in that one at the time, I guess the way that I've looked at the Renaissance Zone approvals that have come in front of us is that if it's made it through the stages, both with your office, Brian, as well as the committee, that if it's met the requirements, we approve it because that's the program, right? I mean, I guess in your mind we head down a crazy slope there if we're picking and choosing which type of
And
business is okay.
Sure, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
if I may. There was one instance, and that was with a project that is now a car wash on North Broadway. That was one that was originally denied by the city council and was reconsidered for those exact reasons. It was, we didn't feel, not we, but some of the members of council that voted against it felt that it wasn't the highest and best use of that property, put it in a car wash. Should we be giving benefits to car washes, or should it be, commercial or retail? And it was reconsidered, and to my thought being, we're not here to pick winners. And if they meet the criteria of the program, they receive the benefit. Especially again, it meets the criteria at the state and at the local levels. It's not our job to say I don't like that, or I like this, or I want this there. If someone wants to build a car wash, they have every right to build a car wash. So.
And I guess, my thought on that is as long as it's meeting the dollar criteria, that makes sense. Now, now the adult one, yeah, we got all kinds of things to talk about with that, but that's a slightly different question to me than like a car wash would have been at the time. So. Yeah.
And I think that one, and I don't know when that one, I wasn't a part of that one, but that one may have conflicted with other city ordinances within, so that might have what triggered that. So.
Okay. Anything else for anyone to add? All right, great. Brian, on to your next program.
All right, thank you. All right, the next program is the Facade Improvement Program. This program was adopted by the City Council in 2021. The goal of the program is to promote private redevelopment and investment in our downtown, encourage beautification in the downtown, and revitalize it and reduce vacancies. We want to provide a unique experience that draws visitors and new residents to our community, and we want to create a sense of pride in our downtown. And to be eligible for this program, your property has to be zoned Central Business District. The applicant must be the property owner as well. We don't want to deal with tenants. We want the property owner to be the applicant for these properties, for the program. The applicant must follow all the design standards that are listed in the program guidelines. The property must have no outstanding nuisances, dangerous building conditions, or building or zoning code violations, and the property owner must be current on all property taxes. The basic program rules you need to know about the program is we will fund true to period design. We want these historic buildings to look historic once again. That's the goal of the program, to bring, I know it's the 2020s, but we'd like to see these buildings look like they're from the 1920s. We don't want modern looking materials placed on these buildings as much as possible. We want them to look historic. The facade must face or be visible from a street. We will fund windows, doors, ornamentation, lighting, ADA accessibility, lighting, awnings, and painting. Masonry repair and replacement and repair is also eligible under this program, and repair and construction of entryways and vestibules. The ineligible improvements that we will not provide funding for would be anything that encourages or promotes historically inappropriate materials. We will not pay for any roofing repairs or HVAC repairs, and we do not pay for signs and security systems. The program funding comes from the Sales Tax Economic Development Fund. We've set up this program in the form of a 10-year forgivable loan. It's not a grant, it is a loan, and it's forgiven after a 10-year period as long as the applicant follows all the rules of the program. It is a reimbursement program. We don't give these monies up front. They have to complete the work first, have it inspected, and then we provide the funding for the program. So in many cases, these applicants either have to go to their savings account to pay for this, or go to a local banker and get a short-term loan to get them through until they get their reimbursement. This is a bidding process. We require the applicants to bid out their projects, and we require 3 bids. We will fund the lowest of the 3 bids. And then there's a 75-25% match, meaning that the funds for this program will cover 75% of the cost. The applicant will cover the other 25%. We also have a cap on the program as well. So a single facade, we will cap up to $100,000 on. A double facade, which would be like a corner lot or a very wide building, a building that's wider than 55 feet, is eligible for up to $180,000. And so it's also important to know that if the bid goes over these amounts, the applicant is on the hook for paying the remainder of that amount. So if let's say the project is worth $300,000 and they're eligible for $180,000 in funding, the applicant is on the hook for $120,000 and the city will cover the other $180,000. The conditions of the program, these are the conditions that the applicant must follow in order to be eligible for the forgivable loan. They have to maintain replacement insurance on the building through the term of the loan, and the loan will be for 10 years. They must not make any major changes to the facade, and they must turn on any exterior lights or window lighting until 10 p.m. nightly, and the ground level must be occupied or actively listed for sale or lease. And in October, I went out and I inspected all of these projects, all 8 of them that have been completed. And all the property owners are complying with these program requirements. So here's some before and after pictures. This is the success stories that we have to brag about for the facade improvement program. This is Mouse River Players on First Street Southeast. On the left is what it looked like before, and on the right is what it looks like today. This is the Auslander building. This was our first project in 2021. Again, the left side is before, the right-hand side is what it looks like today. Boomtown Enterprises, they wrapped up this past summer, and the left side is before and the right-hand side is today. As you'll notice, most of these projects, they're replacing all the windows. They're also replacing doors and entryways as well. The last one I'm going to show here is Whiskey 9. Actually, there's one more after this. Whiskey 9, right next to that building on Central Avenue as well. Again, before is on the left, after is on the right. And 2D Inc., Megan addressed the committee at the last meeting. This is her project. Again, on the left-hand side is before, on the right-hand side is what it looks like today. So I handed out, before the meeting started, I handed out this table to everyone. Kind of explains how much money we've spent on each project, with the status of each project. We currently have a fund balance of about $596,000 for this program. As of January 1st, we do have an appropriation from the City Council for $302,000 that will take effect on January 1. Also want to let the committee know that Project FI8 is the Big M project. We gave them a forgivable loan. We offered one to them, actually. We haven't given it to them because they haven't completed the project. So I think it's important to let the committee know that we're not just handing this money out and hoping that they do the work. We haven't given Epic a single dime of this money. And at the end of the year, their contract will expire, and that money is just going to go right back into the program, can be used for another project. So we require the performance first before we provide the funds. So here's the appropriation amounts where we stand. When we kicked off the program in 2021, just slightly under $1 million was appropriated towards the program. And then through the years, you can see we're picking up steam, finishing more projects. We currently have 5 pending projects worth about $800,000 worth of work. Actually, it's going to be 4 pending projects once the Big M comes offline, so that number will go down. I did some research on what other cities and counties in the state provide facade improvement programs. Some cities call them storefront improvement programs. So the biggest cities in the state were, Minot, Williston, West Fargo, Jamestown, Mandan, and Dickinson all have a program. Several small cities have programs too, like Valley City, Devils Lake, Grafton, Castleton, and et cetera. Even some county governments have this program too, where they offer it to all the anybody within their county, or the small municipalities within their county as well. So this is nothing new to North Dakota. Several cities and counties have used this program through the years, and I'm glad that we're able to provide this in Minot and help improve the appearance of our downtown and create more business activity in our downtown. So that's all that I have for the facade improvement program. Are there any questions?
Okay, committee questions for Brian? Yeah, Tyler?
Chairman, so when this program began, was it limited to Main Street, and then we expanded it to Central? I thought there was a phasing process where we started with Main Street, went to Central, and now it's all Central Business
So,
District.
Mr. Chairman, Tyler, we originally had put the program together like that, but then we took that out. We looked at the rules of or business incentive rules of the state of North Dakota, and we found we couldn't do that. We limited it just to the Central Business District. So you have to have Central Business District zoning in order to be eligible now. So yeah, that was originally proposed, but we took that out.
Perfect. It is nice to see all the other cities that are taking a similar approach to their downtown.
And
Although I struggle a little bit philosophically with taking taxpayer dollars and giving it to businesses to expand, you can't negate that this has been a wildly successful program. And you look at our downtown, and it is thriving and flourishing just in the past 5 years. It's amazing what this program has done for downtown.
And again, Mr. Chairman, if I can respond to that, some of these cities, they offer the program as more of a grant than a forgivable loan. We're kind of unique in a forgivable loan. Most of these cities use it as a grant program. The reason we set up the forgivable loan is to ensure that our investment was protected, to make sure that the property owners were not altering the facade after it was completed. We wanted to make sure that they were actively trying to market these buildings for sale or for lease. We wanted to make sure that the lights were turned on at night, so that it makes downtown more attractive and more safer for people to visit in the evening hours. So that's why we put these rules together for the property owners to follow for 10 years to help provide a good habit of turning on their lights after night to make downtown more inviting and welcoming to people.
Mr. Billingsley, are those covenants restrictions recorded against the property? So anybody that purchases that property knows that those are out there and the restrictions are in place?
Mr. Chairman, it is not a covenant or anything like that. It's a contract.
Okay.
And they sign a personal guarantee and a promissory note. And they promise that they're going to follow the rules of the program. And if they don't do that, then we can go back after the money.
However, if they sell that property 5 years into that 10 years, if they sell that property, the existing, or the person acquiring that property needs to follow those rules,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, so Brian, I'll ask you a few. This one, I think I've been clear throughout my time on council and before that this one gives me a lot of heartburn. So we've got this on the screen right now. Can you talk a little bit about how the programs work in some of these other cities, if you have the info? Dollar amounts, term, it sounds like some of them are grants. Just as an example, I think I've heard people talk about the Mandan one, and I think Mandan did a $30,000 amount. Can you talk about that a little bit? What are we seeing? It feels to me a little bit like we're the richest in this program, without question.
Mr. Chairman, you're probably right. I did not look at all the details of every city. I just looked at the cities who are providing these programs. We probably are up there with, probably one of the richest in the state. I can do some more research on that and come back to the committee if you'd like with that research, okay?
Mr. Chair, if I could respond a little bit. So having worked in several states and communities across the country, this is a common practice in communities. And being a part of kind of standing this up, I think some of the considerations that we had here were, one is we're kind of one of the last communities to try and put this tool into place. So if you're going out comparing to a Mandan or some of these others, those programs have been on the books for decades. And they probably haven't even adjusted the amounts that they're willing to fund due to the costs of materials and inflation and those kinds of things. So we were focused on making sure this worked, that it would be utilized, and that it'd have an impact on our downtown like we envisioned. And so it is, in my opinion, I'll be honest with you, it's probably one of the most richly funded facade improvement programs in the country. But some of that's because we were one of the last ones to come and fund it, and we adjusted those price points for the cost because we knew that, replacing windows, those are expensive. And do we want business owners to piecemeal this? They have 10 windows on the front, but they can only afford to replace 2. So we're going to replace 2 of them, and how does that mismatch? We wanted them to replace all the windows at the same time and improve that entire aesthetic. And so that was some of the driving factors with regards to the funding mechanisms. Now, obviously, that was approved by the council. The council can change that. We could decrease the amount. But my experience would say is that the more you decrease that, the less of an incentive and a practicality it becomes. Therefore, the less it's utilized and the less impact it has on your downtown. But ultimately, the council can control the investment in that. Through this process and using the sales tax economic development dollars. But that was some of the thinking that went into that. Again, I think it's a byproduct of being one of the last ones to come, and we set our thresholds high because we were using those at today's dollars versus what those dollars were 15 years ago. And most of the communities I've been in, they may repaint, they may replace a door, they may replace an awning on the front, but they're not doing as extensive of an aesthetic improvement as what we're getting here in Minot.
Yeah, Paul?
And just to give some more context to this obviously was developed by staff and implemented and approved by the council. This is another deliverable that was given to the council out of the IEDC report back in early 2018, I believe, is when it came out. I just have it pulled up. But again, a facade grant program or property tax moratorium are 2 financial strategies that can incentivize those private property owners who have been hesitant about making necessary updates to upgrade their property. So again, this is staff taking direction from some of the investments we've made into outside studies to come in and try to give us some direction on how we spur some economic growth and development and investment into some of the probably the most neglected portions of our city, and probably frankly some of the most expensive places to invest in the downtown. So
Yeah, Jordan?
And I'd preface this by saying, don't shoot the messenger. These are just things I've heard from business owners not downtown. I hear a lot of angst towards this program as far as we are when business owners not downtown need to replace windows or do things like that, there's nobody to subsidize those improvements for them. They have to just do that, and that's a part of the duty of owning a property and owning your business. The thought is, in that instance, if they have to shoulder that responsibility themselves, why do we subsidize those business owners in a certain area and only those business owners? I'm not here to, that's just something I hear. I think it's a fair thought process. I just wanted to get that out there. That's something to look at in my mind, justifying and knowing that a city is not a business and there are certain objectives that you want to accomplish with taxpayer money. I think we need to be cognizant of what benefits we're getting to sell that to the taxpayer, because there are other taxpayers that, just by virtue of where their business is located, can't take advantage of these things and shoulder those costs on their own.
Tyler?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Nelson, I've heard similar comments from others that I own a business on East Burdick, and that's an entrance into our community as well. Why don't I get those same benefits? So I've heard those very same arguments. I own a business on South Broadway. Why can't I get money to fix up and those are entrances to the city of Minot. So I can relay that is a concern. So maybe we can talk about the future of this program. Is this a program where we focus these dollars on downtown for 20 years, for 30 years, and then we say, okay, we got to pivot. We got to do something different with those dollars. Let's focus on North Broadway for Canadians coming in. Let's focus on South Broadway. Is this something that we can pivot and fix the community as a whole?
Yeah.
Mr.
And Brian, or Harold too, I guess another way to add on to what Tyler's saying is, I was going to ask at some point, is there a logical endpoint? Is this something you do for a while because it serves a purpose and then you finish it? Or is it kind of, as Tyler's referring to, well, no, let's, like Renaissance Zone, let's move it around. Let's help these guys now, and now let's help these guys. What's your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chair, just to kind of respond initially, I would say I've heard those same concerns too, and I've also heard it in previous communities that we were in. Ultimately, this is a program created to address a priority and a need that's been identified in our community. We control the funding to it, we control the access to it, we control all of that. So all of that is flexible. I mean, I think first of all, we have to get past the decision of whether or not this is even an appropriate investment, because there's some that believe that we shouldn't be using taxpayer dollars at all. But if we agree that this is a worthwhile investment in taxpayer dollars because it benefits the community as a whole, and then we want to talk about moving forward to expanding it, not just having it for downtown, to other areas of the community. There are communities in the country that do that. You know, a previous community I was working in, we had gotten to a point where the downtown wasn't really using it anymore. And we had other corridors of our community that had high visibility that had deteriorated, that we began talking about expanding that. Your equivalent here to what they had there would be like your Broadway corridor, right? I will say, though, that these facade improvement programs are typically focused to the downtown because, one, they add a historical character and identity to your community, right? And there's certain costs. Like if you try to go replace these buildings today with the same material and quality of craftsmanship, the price point would be way more astronomical than what we're investing in this today. So we're trying to preserve that because that character and that historical is what gives you your identity. You know, I was in Arizona at the peak of their boom. I'm sorry, there's not a lot of difference between the different Arizona communities. They all grew at the same time, and they all look almost identical. Unless they're old towns and you get into their original downtown, and then you start seeing the difference of the character and the identity, right? But when they're all built brand new, they all look the same. And so this is about preserving your identity. And with that comes additional challenges because the codes and infrastructure has changed over those years from the 1800s, the early 1900s, down to the 2000s. And that creates a barrier and a challenge here. Putting in sprinkler systems, updating all the electrical from knob and tube to our current electrical systems and those kinds of things that are all safety. These buildings predate a lot of those things, and that all adds significant cost and barriers to doing these things. And so one is preserving the identity, and two is doing this. But if the support is to continue to offer this, there's nothing that limits this just to the downtown. Downtown is where it started. But if you have other corridors, this is about improving the aesthetics, right? This is dealing with that old broken window theory, right? That we're trying to stop the decline down, and we're trying to revitalize and re-energize. And these programs have been effective across the country in helping do that to various methods. And it can be applied to different areas of the community if that's what the council chooses. Council and the community chooses where's eligible for that and to what degree are we funding that, if at all.
Yeah, Beth?
Hi, thank you. So I'm going to be bringing this up a lot, but the Minot 2040 comprehensive plan, which the city of Minot spent a lot of money and time putting all the effort into this. It was all public input, developer input, business owner input, past city council leaders. It's a wonderful study of what the collective whole would like to see the future of Minot. It exists, it's there. And one, chapter 9, community character, aesthetics and design, talks specifically about that, that culture of what downtown should look like. And then it goes, and other corridors. And it talks about what you can see from the state fairgrounds, where all of the visitors to Minot come in July. What you can see driving in on 83. It identifies other areas that might be considered for aesthetic improvements or other programs. And it's a wonderful, it goes through all of our strengths already, some of our opportunities, the mix, the diversity, what we could look for in homes, what we could look for as policies, what the planning committees that exist might look into. It's a great piece. So chapter 9 on the Minot 2040 plan. And Alderman Pittner, you brought up the IEDC plan as well, which is a few years older than that, but not too far. So we've taken a really deep look at some of those things pretty recently. Brian and anybody else with the city who maybe would have additional information, because as we're sitting here kind of talking, it seems like we maybe have some of this information available if we want to dig into it. Are there any other plans or studies that have been done that, you know, that the city's paying experts to come in and do these things? But is there anything else that we should be looking at? It seems like there's possibly a really great recommendation that could come from this committee to identify the next step for this program if we feel like downtown is. And I agree, it looks really great. And especially when I see Tioga and Lakota, I've spent a significant amount of my youth in those communities. They had a lot of that culture. Tioga's Main Street was very Norse and had a certain storefront. But after the boom, those buildings changed ownership and plans, and they lost some of that culture. And so I believe that this program is attempting to put it back in. So. These programs are great, and we already sort of have a plan laid out of what would be a really great next step. Is there anything else you'd like us to look at?
Paul?
Sure. Again, and maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We have a framework of a program in the Renaissance Zone that allows us so many blocks and islands. Maybe we tie this program, this facade improvement program, to the Renaissance Zone to further incentivize development. When we talk about some of the properties on North Broadway, the corridors, maybe if we have an island on East Burdick, maybe this program is tied to some of those programs to incentivize some of those development for some of those dilapidated or deferred maintenance troubled properties. I'm not saying that that's what we need to do, but again, when being a part of the implementation of this, that was always the vision, was let's start downtown, have a centralized impact, and if we can grow this and expand this to citywide, and again, there's only so many dollars available. There's only so many programs only so many projects you can do within a given budget cycle. But again, I think the hope was that this could be expanded. Now, it would have to take a different form and have to have different policy guidelines. You know, restoring the history of a building built in 1905 is different than restoring the history of a building built in 1980. And it's going to have different aesthetics and different things that need to be, but ensuring that the property is insured, marketed, occupied, making sure that it has at least a 20-year life of a roof, so we're not investing in a property that's going to become dilapidated and have further issues. I think there's ability for this program to actually expand citywide, and there can be adjustments to dollars and all that and all those things, especially if it's tied with other benefits to other property owners. But again, that also goes to the due diligence of the people that run these programs or that are on these committees to make sure that we are doing a good job, like I said earlier in the meeting, marketing these to business owners, to property owners that need to not only become aware of these programs, but also volunteer on these boards so that they can help spread the word and help educate the public on what kind of a benefit these programs can bring to the community as a whole. So again, I think these programs can be improved, and I think they should be. I think to this point, maybe this is a committee that is formed every 4 years and sits down and really looks and talks about economic development and what programs we can, and rehash the comp plan, 2040 comp plan, and rehash the IEDC report or any other, maybe there's a recommendation for a new investment into a new study or a new group or whatever it might be to come in and really look at what we're doing from an outside perspective, because we're all here, we all see it. Sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees, right? So again, I think there's benefit that can absolutely come from not only this committee, but re-looking at these programs, so.
I mean,
Yeah.
Alderman Bittner, as we're getting ready for the legislature, I just love hearing we might fund more studies. That's always exciting. But even when we're looking at the Minot Comp Plan, there's a section that says focus area, and they take a look at development trends, tax, islands where property tax isn't as high as it should be, and it's looking at the northwest growth area, southwest growth area, extraterritorial area, the Northern Highway Entry Corridor, downtown, flood impact neighborhoods, and then as well as the highway entry corridors, which were seen as major opportunities for growth and maybe additional investment if incentives would help those, you drive into our city, look a little bit nicer, right? So the studies that have been done, I think were done really well, and maybe that's just something that we need to build off of. The other thing that is talked about in this study is sort of addressing the, well, why not my business or why not my facade? And what it outlines here is that it is where public is there and where they're seeing. And so if your business isn't located in a place where there's a lot of public, it might not be, a priority for the city to really improve the look of that. And understanding that is kind of picking and choosing, but when you're trying to address your community's culture and character, aesthetics, you have to start to put some parameters on that, so.
Jordan?
Just to, kind of continue this discussion, but maybe take it a little bit different route. We kind of make some of these property owners sound like they got nothing. Like, isn't it the property owner's responsibility and incentive to keep up their own property? We make it sound like because it's, something that's visible, that the city has to pay 75% of any of these improvements. Shouldn't the owner of the property want to make their property look pleasing aesthetically and functional and all those things? It kind of seems to me like the way this is laid out, it almost feels like pseudo corporate welfare. Like we're just gonna make sure that these improvements get done. I struggle with whether that's the city's responsibility. I'll just be honest. I know there's studies, that the economic development side does, and yeah, there's benefit. But I was at a retirement party last night, and words kind of struck me that the guy that was retiring is the CFO, and every dollar that he spent, he was spending. He looked at it like he was spending the owner's money. And I'm looking at this like we're spending taxpayers' money here. And spending taxpayers' money to give it to businesses, I don't know if that's what the taxpayer wants. I mean, just from what I see and what I hear and the angst with people, I don't know if I can square that. That's just my comment on this.
Yeah, Paul?
And I, excuse me, and just to respond, again, I agree with that. There's some, not every project or program or benefit is created equal, right? We look at the Big M building. Would the Big M building have started the process that it was on? Was the facade improvement program or the Renaissance Zone the linchpin that kicked off, tens of millions of dollars in investment? No, probably not. But when you look at, did they have the resources to do that project with all those benefits? Yeah, probably. When I look at some of the other businesses, did Prairie Sky Breads have that capital to do that? Their business? No. did Guilty Sweets, did High Third, did Iron Horse, did Whiskey Nine, did The Weekender. When you see these other businesses that are now given an opportunity through the investment into these difficult, troublesome properties, and that's another thing too. Is it their responsibility, the property owners? Yeah, but a lot of property owners didn't do it, and they probably weren't going to do it. Then it was going to go back to the county on back taxes, which was the case in a lot of these properties. Well, then what do? Then do you pay taxpayer dollars to tear these properties down, to maintain them? I mean, you look at some of these properties, and sitting on the Renaissance Zone as a liaison, I've seen the before and after, or throughout the process of these. And some of these buildings were filled with crap-filled buckets, literally. They were squatters. They were pigeons. They were health and safety hazards. Hypodermic needles everywhere. I mean, these are, and I'm not making these things up. I can get you the pictures if you really want them. That's what these properties were. And sometimes there needs to be a little grease on the wheel to get some of these projects over so that other small businesses, entrepreneurs that aren't flush with cash, maybe have a commercial spot, a pop-up shop to start their business. And as a taxpayer, I want to see those people given an opportunity to succeed. So I agree. Not every program, not every benefit. I don't. And I come from a family of farmers. I don't get farm subsidies, but we're not talking about cutting those out. You know, again, there are some benefits that are out there to incentivize growth, to incentivize investment, and I'm okay with that. And I'm never going to be able to. The world's not perfect. We're not going to be able to say every project we do, we invest $1, we get 2 out. It's just not. But if the quality of life goes up for the plethora of airmen that come to our community, that come through our corridors and come to our downtown that say, this is a cool spot. When I have my family come and visit, I want to bring them here. And this place is only here because of the investment of a small business owner that invested in this spot or was given an opportunity because this spot was propped up from tax benefits. Again, it's never going to be dollars to donuts on all these investments, but again, and it sticks with me from some of the presentations from our state representatives and our state Chamber of Commerce and our state Board of Tourism. We have to look at economic development in a very holistic approach. We can't keep doing what we were doing and saying, 1 + 1 = 2. It just doesn't work anymore. We see what those communities are doing. And again, there are some programs that absolutely we can take that approach. Absolutely. And in some of them, it's the judgment call. It's what our community feels is needed. And again, you read through that 2040 comp plan, a lot of them go absolutely 100% against what was just said. And I'm not saying that's wrong, right? Because I share a lot of those same values. But we have to understand that these are giving opportunities to other small business owners, other people that come to our community, people, airmen or people that come to our community as students and decide to stay and invest in Minot because there is an opportunity here. And some of those opportunities are a byproduct of these programs, in what I see.
Harold, you got something?
Maybe if I can add a little bit to that. And, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is what is the public benefit? And is there a public benefit, right? And is it more of a benefit to the public to have a thriving downtown? Or is it more of a cost drain to the public to have a downtown that's dead, high crime rates, nobody feels safe? We respond to a lot of fires. Police are down there on a regular basis dealing with issues. What's the cost of that, right? And what's better for the community as a whole? Downtowns, and I've been in a lot of communities that have struggled on how to revitalize their downtown. And can't figure out how to do it. Okay, so the downtowns were created because those used to be your commerce centers, right? That was the home of your mercantiles. That was the home of your law offices and your banks. That's where you went to do business. It's also where you went for your entertainment. You went to dance halls and saloons and all those kinds of things. It was the heart and the center and the vibrancy of your downtown. That changed in the 70s with the growth of big box. Walmarts, Best Buys, shopping centers, malls, those kinds of things. The downtowns were no longer the economic center, and we're dying. and you're left with these large facilities that come with a high cost of maintenance. I agree with the general premise that it's the property owner's responsibility to maintain their property. But over time, if it becomes more and more expensive to do that and you can't afford to do it, what do? You sell it to somebody. But now we have a laundry list of expenses that go along with that building, and the value goes down. And then so they don't come in with, well, I can buy it for $500,000, but I've got to spend $1 million to fix it up. No, they buy it for $500,000 and they put no investment into it, and it continues to run down. We can use some examples of some property up on North Hill that are prime examples of this, right? The M building downtown has been a prime example of that for 20 years. The Trinity buildings are going to become that issue and problem for this community very quickly, right? So these programs are designed to try and bring back revitalization, because at the end of the day, the cost of bringing it back and revitalizing it and having it be a place of energy and identity within your community is less costly than the problems that come with it if you don't, right? And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to balance here. What is the public good? And do we need to put incentives in it? If it's a hotbed, yeah, you have less need for these incentives because the market's going to drive that. But in most of these instances, the market's not driving it enough. Minot's downtown market hasn't been hot enough for someone to come and invest in the M building. Not successfully anyway, right? But we're still left with a multi-story building that continues to deteriorate, and we leave it to the market. The market's not going to do anything with it. So what's the value to the community of either removing it or revitalizing it? That's what we're dealing with here. And in my mind, that is where councils and taxpayers and communities across the country have felt that is a public benefit, and they're willing to invest in that. Ultimately, Minot's got to decide if that's a public benefit or not to this community, and if they're willing to invest in it. And it's obvious to me that we have some very strong opinions on both sides of that argument. Our task here, and ultimately the responsibility of the council, is to make that decision on behalf of the community and direct staff. Which direction are we going? Is this a value for taxpayer dollar investment or not? We can scale it back. We can turn it off. But I don't think you're going to have the revitalization and the speed of revitalization that we've seen here over the last few years with these programs in place as what we have for the last 2 decades without it. But ultimately, that's a community decision, right? In an ideal world, everyone would take pride of their property. And there were generations in the past that they did, right? I was neighbor to a community in Iowa, very strong Dutch heritage. And the city itself, and city staff didn't have to do code enforcement because the neighbors would go knock on each other's doors. Hey, you haven't mowed your lawn in 2 weeks. We don't do that in our community. You either need to mow your lawn or I'm going to come mow it for you, right? Completely different approach. But not a lot of communities do that. But over time and over generations, some of that pride has been deprioritized within our organizations. But we get left with dealing with the bones and the skeletons of what's been left by prior generations. And it's our decision now, today, how we're going to handle that and how we're going to leave that for the next generation. And that's what these programs are intended to help do.
Yeah, Beth?
Just to bring it back to Alderman Pittner, you mentioned what our community is like for those that come here on a temporary basis for the Air Force Base. The other thing that we continually are talking about, and we were visited by Katie Ralston from Commerce to talk about workforce, and we continue to have that struggle in Minot, and particularly for these small businesses even, they struggle with it all the time. But we're in competition we all know this, we're in competition with other states all the time. I'm constantly trying to lobby my brothers and sisters to move back here, and they won't, because they're in different, larger communities with more things and more opportunities and options. And so when I look at what we're spending as a city to help make our downtown, and I'm thinking particularly of First and Central, to make that corner a place where everybody wants to go when they come to this community. I think that it's paying for itself, and how much business you see down there. And even now in the holidays, that's where I'll be heading several times in the next few weeks. I think it's really important to think about what that means when we're trying to attract people to this city. And if we just decide not to do it, if we decide not to have these programs, not to take advantage of them, whether it's the Renaissance program or the Facade program, we are going to lose people, because there's other communities that have those incentives ready, and they're taking advantage of them, and they're using them for the benefit of that larger whole. I think that's really important to consider. Also, and you guys are really going to get sick of me referencing this, but in the 2040 plan, the community surveyed over 1,000 people in the Minot community, and they asked for a wide demographic of people. Trees, clean, green space, landscaping, sidewalks, lighting, walkable art. Those are the top 8 things that were mentioned. And so the Facade program is helping to make our downtown look like a downtown, feel like a downtown, and be safe and walkable like a downtown. And so that's just what is continually reinforced as we have these conversations.
So one thing with that, Beth, and I think that set of words that you just used, to me, stands out, okay? Because that, other than maybe lighting, maybe some art that gets painted on the side of a building, isn't about building a building. And a different question is, if we've got $2.1 million coming into the Economic Development Fund through sales tax every year, what's the right way to spend that money? Is the right way to spend that money on the North Broadway corridor, not on buildings and not on private property, but on things the city already controls, on things that the city can do to make it look wonderful, so when those new airmen get to town and they're driving through that for the first time, they go, wow, this is a beautiful place. That actually is in the city's purview because it is public property. And so, another thing that I'll mention with this program that is a little troubling to me is that our main measurements of the process are a building that looks nicer, which if you spend $180,000, I guess the minimum investment, if you were getting the full amount, would be something like, what, $250, something like that? If you spend $250,000 on the outside of a building, it's going to look great. Like, I think we would all agree to that. No matter who's footing the bill, it's going to look good. So measuring it on whether we like how it looks isn't exactly the question to me. And the second part of that then is, so we're measuring it on how much money did we spend, how many projects did we complete. None of those are good measurements for an economic development program. They're not deliverable to anybody other than the property owner, who gets amazing benefit. I'll bring back the young lady making $30,000 a year with 2 kids. Her sales tax dollars are fixing up buildings in downtown for property owners. Are we okay with that? And should we be? And so again, with that $2.1 million, as we come to the back end of this process, right here today, I'm not saying we should stop the sales tax or change it, but is this the best use of that? And that's why my point maybe goes to, is there a logical endpoint? Is there a place in time where this makes sense? It's run its course, and we do the next thing, which maybe is more public property. Maybe it's right now, we should take $500,000 out of that and make sure that we're really good with snow in downtown. Because right now, on a day like this, it's a little tougher. As I drove through a couple times today, it's a little tougher to get over the curbs right now. Is that what's going to drive downtown businesses to success on a day like today? So I think I brought up an analogy before that, when we were looking for a new house, and my wife, we walked into some houses that were $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, and she thought, wow, these are beautiful. Well, yeah, if you pay for it, you'll get something beautiful. The question is, who's paying for it, right? So other thoughts?
No,
Anybody?
and again, no, I agree, and it's. I keep going back to Katie from the state. It's a holistic approach, right? It's that balance, right? It's never going to be dollar for dollar. You go to the analogy of someone, single mom making $30,000, probably renting an apartment with a couple kids. Well, we've got property tax relief built within our pennies. She's renting. She's not seeing that benefit. Her landlord is. So again, maybe we should just cut checks. And I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I'm saying and I agree with you. That's why I see the benefit of this committee, and I think that this committee being, say a regularly meeting committee, but maybe every so many years this has stood up and it looks at the programs that we have and how can we make them better? What have the community surveys said? What do the comp plans say? Are we sticking to those roadmaps on where we really want to see our community go? And just to tie it back, I asked Jen to bring up the picture that you see in front of you. I mean, this is, I don't know what year this is from, but I mean, how can you not get romantic about downtown and commerce in downtown? And you could probably liken this to several other corridors throughout Minot, whether that's, Burdick over by Corbett Field and by the zoo and the history, Eastwood Park in those areas, the old Coke plant. I mean, there's a lot of corridors throughout Minot that I think, given their integrity and their vibrancy, drives commerce. And again, like I say, I have a hard time, and I get it. I want those aggregates. I want those metrics that just say, I'm a numbers guy. I want to see those metrics that say, this is the direct benefit from there. But I understand that that's just, if I'm going to wait on that, I'm going to be waiting quite a while because I don't think those numbers exist. But no, a lot of good work.
Chair,
Yeah.
you mentioned that, so we're measuring the program on the number of projects and the dollars. Are we measuring that, or is that just what's reported? Are we looking at the success, or is that just what's getting reported to us? Do we need to consider if there's a calculation of the economic impact of those businesses? Because if we're just looking at reporting, sure, yeah, we're just spending a lot of money, but is there a way to bring it around? Can we just think about that?
Just to add, with those programs too, again, there are clawbacks or teeth within this program that make sure that the buildings aren't just getting a new face on them, right? They have a solid roof. They're up to building codes in certain ways. They're maintaining, your HVAC stuff has to either be on the roof or not on the street of the property. Again, we're trying to spruce them up, but there are also things. There also has to be. We're not going to invest in a lemon. Again,
Right.
there are metrics there or provisions in there. But I agree. Yes, those are the numbers we know. Can we look at the increase in property value from this program? I'm sure on some level it's probably not going to be as high as one would hope, because it's the aesthetics. It's not the bones. It's not. But again, this is also these programs. In my mind, these are tools in the toolbox, right? And you can't just grab one tool. I mean, back in the day, right? You had a hammer. That's all you needed to build a cabin. But now you need an entire garage filled, and my wife can attest to this, to do any project, right? You want to do a bathroom remodel, I probably need 4 more new tools. So again, those are in order to do some of these projects and to really drive this engine that is economic development in some of these corridors, there needs to be a Renaissance zone. There needs to be, maybe some ordinance changes, that we can handle at the council level for some of these things, whether it's relaxing of ordinances or variances that allow property owners to get creative within the constriction, the constraints that they have. So again, just wanted to give some context.
And one other thing to just add, looking backwards, with the things that sort of create culture and create that feeling of whether it's home or community. I remember growing up as a kid, and you'd drive up Broadway across the Broadway Bridge, and we had wonderful decorations. Now, I don't remember at the time, or I don't know if it was city or park or whoever that did that, but I believe it was a taxpayer-driven thing. It was paid for that way. There are, again, if we're spending money to create that, I wonder if those types of things don't create that just as well, and we don't have to choose which business owner gets the benefit, because we get it as a whole, because it's community property, or it's those types of things. Now, you could look at it the opposite way and say, well, look, that's wasted, right? I mean, it's just a thing that's sitting on a light pole. So, it doesn't actually create value, real value, other than sort of the nostalgic looks, right? And so I think as we think of this, I have my first question, which is, do we need $2.1 million going into an account? Once we think through that, then where should that go? What should we do with it? What are the things that we want to do? This is one of those. And if we decided to bring something to council that said, hey, we don't think this should be there anymore, and the council agreed and we got rid of it, I mean, really, one way to look at that then is, right now in 25 at least, $300,000. We'd at least have to think about where are we going to put that, right? Because we've committed to the 2.1 already. And so there's a bigger picture question to all this. And where my mind goes is, how much more of this would we see naturally if that was in the hands of the business owners to start with, but all the business owners? Low tax, low regulation. That's the key to everything we do. And the less we focus on that and try to pick places to put the dollars, I feel like we get off track. I feel like we really have to invent ways to kind of do that, and that's sort of what these become over time. Others? Okay. All right, so let's Brian, I want to finish this up. Is there anything concrete right now that we'd like to send back to council in terms of bullets around the facade program? Tyler, you got something you look like you might have something to say.
I got a lot. So I think, I don't know how we can proceed however you would like, Mr. Chairman. I would prefer, like, at the end, we can round table each one of these programs one by one and say, okay, Renaissance Zone, here's what we want to do. Flex Space, here's what we want to do. Home Builder Tax Credit, here's what we want to do. All of these programs.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's your call.
And Tyler, I agree with you, but the other thing is, we've just invested about an hour and a half of discussion while it's fresh.
Sure.
So if we've got thoughts even that would make it easier when we come back to do that,
Sure.
I don't want to lose them now.
Absolutely.
So if there's thoughts that anyone has about recommendations back to council, what would those be? Beth, do you have some?
I would recommend that we take a larger look at the areas laid out in the Minot 2040 plan for potential investment or programs for facade and appearance aesthetic improvement, particularly focusing on our entryways, I think, and that was a huge discussion piece after this plan was put out. So our highway entries, and just consider if there's something there.
Kind of. I'm trying, yeah. And that was just a larger look at the areas laid out in the 2040 plan, right?
Yes. Sorry, I was so wordy.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yep.
Chairman, if we do open it up to other areas of town, we're probably gonna have to look at reducing the amount per project or coming up with a point-based system, because you're gonna get more applications than money allows. So, we're gonna have to look at changing maybe the structure a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So
If we choose to go that way.
across the committee, is there consensus right now that this is valuable and that tweaking it is the approach we want to send back to the council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think there's some tweaks that could be made to this program. Yeah. However, I'd like to have a whole, I'd like to have a list of bullet points to send back to council, not just, hey, council, these are the come up with some changes. No, I think we got to send the council those bullet points as far as here's what we think need to be tweaked.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I guess really what I was getting at is one of the possible recommendations here is that we feel like this has got a logical endpoint, and here's what we think it is, and then we move on to what we think the next way of looking at things is. And again, I've been clear about that with this program in particular, that's where I would come down. But I'm not the only one on the committee, and so I just want to make sure that's out there. We'll come back, Paul.
This is maybe just a point of clarification for me to ask. One of the things in my head that I had when we get through all these presentations and whatnot was, do we look at the total amount that we are spending on economic development as a city, break it down by program, and then prioritize what is most important, what maybe is least important, and then come up with, a ranking of, okay, if the city council is going to come back and say, this is what we're going to spend in 2026, here's where we start. And if we have 37 items and we can only fund 34 of them, 35, 36, 37, go. Or if there's some kind of allocation, is that not kind of, am I off base in my thinking on some of that?
I wouldn't say necessarily. I mean, the analogy that comes to my mind is our capital improvement plan. Where we're looking at major projects here. We're talking, $50 million for a bridge, right? But at the same time, that same type of thought process does come through. And I think right now, to the staff's credit, they do some of that. Our number changes in the city funds portion of the sales tax dollars based on what we think the coming year looks like for projects. And so they're making some of those adjustments. But I think in general terms, you've sort of got that right. That's, those priorities is kind of where we'd like to be. And one of the other things, and I'll just throw it out now because I meant to a little bit ago, is that, you know, another approach to this whole thing is to say, oh, well, this developer in downtown isn't doing anything with their building. They meet this program, they fit here, you know, they're both in Renaissance and facade, and their building's for sale. I mean, one economic development thought process would be the city buys it using these dollars, fixes it up to meet the program under all the different things that are there, and then sells it at a profit, right? I mean, again, I'm not an advocate for that. I would never vote for us to go that direction. But why would we have any different thought process towards that than we do today of handing them the money to do it? We're getting to the same endpoint, right? We get a building that looks beautiful, we spent the money to get there, and we're now back out of it. I don't know. Yeah, Jordan?
You know what you just said, if you have a building for 700,000, you save the 500,000, you sell it for 1.5 million, take a profit, or you can give through the incentive of programs some dollar amount, and then the property owner who got the incentives turns around and sells it. Well, then they're just taking the money they got from the city and pocketing it through the sale of the property. And I think that's probably a lot of what the common taxpayer probably doesn't like about, you know, some of these things. And I want to square one thing. I understand where these programs come from. I understand what the city's trying to do with facade, and I understand the end goal of it, and I understand that the city is not a business. And if the city wants to have a beautiful downtown that we can take a lot of pride in, and they think it's important enough to spend taxpayer money, then that is what it is. But I look back to the city council election last summer. The three of you guys who won, none of you were incumbents. And I think a lot of that was driven by citizen angst towards taxes and prioritizing spending. And I'm just trying to, whether their voice is my voice or not, give those people, try to bring those thoughts to this committee so that at least we can say we considered them. And not just, okay, the voters speak, and then 4 years later we hope they forget, and then we go back and we have voters ticked off again. I'm just trying to bring those discussions to the forefront so that at least we can say we considered them before we send our report back to council.
Paul?
No, and I think just to Jordan's comment, as far as like prioritizing, I think that happens now with like the Magic Fund guidelines and the way that those work, that we have through, Harold and Brecca with Chamber EDC. There is a prioritization of the bucket system, right? That then we kind of prioritize these programs that fit within this, the funding mechanism, and they kind of set a budget on an annual basis on what gets funded and what doesn't, and some year to year that'll fluctuate based off of those things. But and then to circle back to your point, is there a logical endpoint? I think yes. Whether that's a logical endpoint of it in its entire existence or expanding or taking a new form. I think maybe we could ask Brian to, you have a list of properties that are downtown. If you can say, if every one of these properties applied for, what is that dollar amount, right? We can clearly easily do that. I shouldn't say easily, I'm not gonna be the one doing it. But get a list of all the properties that are downtown. If everyone applied, this is the benefit. Is that our goal? No, but that would give us a very clear quantitative number that says, if you put $20 million into this property, every property owner downtown could do this. Is that our goal? Is that realistic? Absolutely not. Is that what we should be striving for? No. But, hey, we're going to do this for, then the council or this body can say, hey, let's do this for 5 more years. And then we're going to expand it into this. And then we're going to move it to different corridors around Minot to try to drive incentive and try to incentivize investment. Maybe that's a deliverable that can come off as a bullet point. We'll say those for the kind of the deeper dive roundtables. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I think there should be, because I think there's other ideas out there, and I think there's other improvements, and the community's needs and wants are going to change. And I think that's the benefit of having this committee together, is that we can be responsive to that and say, hey, we need to look at this, and we're going to have a lot of flood protection, ongoing maintenance expenses that beautification that sales tax can go towards, whether it's, this portion of sales tax or infrastructure, but also, reigniting your riverways and activating those so that people come to town, they can utilize the river and use that as an asset versus a big scary thing that can flood, So again, I think this can take many different ways, shapes, and forms. But yes, I do see an eventual end date, long-winded answer.
Okay. Other thoughts? Anything else that we want to make sure we have written down, Tyler?
Final comment, and I would agree, Paul, that, I mean, if you tell, business owner, property owners in this downtown district that, hey, you have, this program's been available for 3 years, 2 years, 3, 7 more years, you have a maximum of 10 years, that's the sunset. You have 7 more years to fix up your property, and then this program's, we're doing something else. I think that would give them a clear understanding, you had the opportunity to do this. There's your window.
Yeah.
And again, just to keep the conversation going, again, I was an advocate for this program. I helped, bring this program to life because, again, I see the benefit, and I believed in the benefit. I think I'm seeing the benefit of people investing in their properties. But again, I'm open to doing something different. But at the same time, we haven't heard of anything. And could we just put it towards, infrastructure costs? Yeah, but I think we have a duty of trying to improve the quality of life for people within our community, and this is what I see as an avenue to do that. So again, yeah, if someone's got a good idea or a different idea or a better idea, that's why we're here. So
Yep.
I'm all
And
about
I, and I think that's a good point, Paul. And I guess I think as council members, I think we can bring different perspectives to that. I look at the role of the city to provide the basic public services that we can't do well for ourselves at the lowest cost we can while breaking even. That's the way I look at it. I look at the park board as driving quality of life. Okay. I think the city provides a level playing field to make sure everybody can participate the way that they want. And it's when we head into these areas where we're trying to make something happen where we can get a little bit off track. So again, those are differences of perspective. It's not right or wrong. I look at the role of the city in our daily life a little bit different. And so that obviously you can see that colors the way that I look at some of these things, that these maybe aren't areas that we could be in. And whether it's a matter of saying, hey, let's take that $2.1 million and let's do more street work, or let's give it back to the people, or however we're going to do that. I think there can be good differences along that line, because hopefully it keeps a tension between the two where we end up in a good spot for the people. I think that's what we're looking for. Yep. Okay. All right.
Would we say we have 3 bullet points
Yep.
for this?
Can you read off what we wrote down?
Yep. Take a larger look at the areas laid out in the 2024 comprehensive plan. Bullet point 2 is if the program is offered to more areas of town, change the structure of the program and or reduce the amount offered per application. And the third one kind of stemmed from over here, and it was including a sunset date to the program.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's good. Okay. Sounds good. All right, Brian, I think it looked like Tiff was next. You want to take us through that? I'd like to be as respectful as we can and hit us
Yeah.
right at 3 today. And if we continue next, that's fine.
That'll be fine, Mr. Chairman. So the next program I'm going to present is tax increment financing. Just to give you some background on TIF districts and what they are and how long they've been around in North Dakota. TIF is a public financing method that is used to subsidize redevelopment, infrastructure, elimination of blight, and other community improvement projects. Through the use of TIF, municipalities typically divert future property tax revenues into in a defined area and use it to further an economic development project. We've only approved 3 TIF districts in Minot since 2020. TIF's been around since 1945, and 49 of 50 states currently use TIF districts and they're legal to use in those states. They've been around North Dakota for over 50 years, since 1973, even though we just recently started using them in Minot. So this is a table that explains basically how a TIF works, and the things you need to be aware of is the creation date and the termination date of the TIF. Any tax increment that is brought in after the creation date up until the termination date that is above the baseline property value can be used in the TIF district to fund things like infrastructure, abatement of asbestos, and other things that are eligible. There's guidelines that are put together by this, in the Century Code that we have to follow. We can't just use it for anything. There's specific things that we can use TIF district funding for. After the termination of the TIF district, then the windfall happens, the property tax revenue goes back to the taxing bodies. And the goal of the program is to bring up the value of the property from a low amount, obviously, to a very high amount. So some TIF 101 tips for everyone here. In North Dakota, a TIF cannot exceed 25 years in length. A TIF that's 5 years or less in length only requires city council approval. If it's longer than 5 years, then you have to go to the school district and the county board to receive approval. They have the ability to participate, partially participate, or back out altogether. The types of projects that are eligible are for blighted properties, such as the Big M was declared a blighted property. You can use it for commercial properties and industrial properties as well. And then there are notification requirements for TIF districts. We have to send public hearing notices out to local units of government. We have to send public hearing notices to potential competitors. So for example, when we did the Big M, we had to look at, since the Big M was proposed as a mixed-use building, we had to identify every mixed-use building owner in the city of Minot. We identified like 40 different properties that were considered mixed-use. We sent all those property owners a letter inviting them to the public hearing. None of them showed up, but for each TIF district, we have to send out notices to all the potential competitors. And we also have to publish the hearing notice in the local newspaper as well. So the first TIF district that was approved by the city was Blue on Broadway. It was approved in 2020. It was a $700,000 TIF for 5 years, so it was only approved by city council. It didn't have to go to the other taxing bodies. It was a commercial project, and the TIF district funded the construction of First Street Southwest, which is the street directly behind the Blue on Broadway building. And the TIF funded $420,000 of that street improvement, and the developer covered the other $280,000. This is what the street looks like today. If you recall, this street used to look more like an alley. It didn't have sidewalks, didn't have street lights, didn't have the fire hydrants and things of that nature along this street. So the developer installed all the infrastructure on the street for one full block, and the 5-year TIF district helped fund a portion of this project. This TIF district will expire next year, actually, so in 2026 it should go fully back on the property tax rolls. The second TIF district that was approved by the city was the Big M building. It was approved in June of 2022 as a 20-year TIF for about $2.5 million. It was declared a blighted building. The project for the TIF was to abate the asbestos that was in the building. And it was a 90-10 public-private split where the property owner is still going to pay 10% towards of their increment to the taxing bodies, and then the other 90% would be diverted to pay off the bonds that were assessed towards this project to help fund the asbestos abatement. And one of the interesting things about this TIF is we put a minimum assessment agreement to kind of protect our investment of $14.7 million. So that way we can still bring in the revenue that's needed to pay off the bonds. So today there is, if you look at the property assessment for the Big M, you'll see $14.7 million on there, and the property owners has to pay that their property tax at that level for the next 20 years. And then once at that minimum at that level, now if it goes above that level, they pay that amount. But the minimum amount is $14.7 million for 20 years, and that ensures our investment to make sure that those bonds will be paid off. And then the third TIF is the tracks. That was approved in January of 2023. It was a 5-year TIF for about $2.8 million. It was declared a commercial project. It's the project for the funds were going to go towards developing the east half of the public plaza that is proposed behind this building, the Maverick building. That building is nearing completion. It is reactivated now. It was shut down for a while, but they did get a building permit to start work there again. And that one also had a 90-10 public-private split as well. This is what the tracks is going to look like, eventually someday. Building number 1 is the building that's up there now, that's under construction right now. And then it's supposed to be built in that order by the building numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, with a parking ramp in there as well. So that's the long-term plan for the tracks. The 5-year TIF for the tracks only covers buildings 1 and 2. They're going to come back to do a second TIF for the remainder of the project at a later date. And so as of now, that TIF only covers, again, the east half of that plaza, which is the area in gray, and buildings 1 and 2. So that's pretty much everything that I have. Everything I have in the 3 TIF districts that were approved here in Minot. As I stated earlier, TIF has been around North Dakota for quite some time, over 50 years, and we just recently started using them in Minot. But there's a long-standing history of using TIF in other cities throughout the state, especially cities like Fargo and West Fargo and Grand Forks. But I've seen that even other cities like Bismarck, Mandan, Williston, Dickinson, Jamestown, and Wahpeton also have utilized TIF districts in recent years. So just about every major city in the state of North Dakota offers TIF district financing. So that concludes my presentation on TIFs. Are there any questions?
Okay, questions for Brian? Yeah, Justin.
Brian, let's talk about the Big M building and so the minimum assessment value, what year did that start then?
It would have started in 2023 because it was approved June of 2022.
Yeah, so, and I'm not expecting you to know the exact answer, but what was the value of that property before, like in 20?
I can look it up. I can bring it to the next meeting if you'd like.
All right, I was just curious on that, so that's all I had.
Other questions for Brian? Okay, so, yeah,
Actually,
Tyler.
yeah,
Yep.
one just came to mind. Sorry for the late response. Mr. Billingsley and those other cities, do they have any criteria that restrict this to a certain area of town? Does it have to be a blighted building that they're renovating? Is it for new construction? Is it wide open?
Mr. Chairman, I did not do that kind of research. I just Googled different cities in the state that use TIF districts, was able to find these cities as using them most often. I don't know what kind of restrictions they have. That would require some research, and that's something I can do for the committee as well.
Yep. And Brian, along those lines, do we have a written document of the guidelines for TIF?
Yes, we do. I
Okay.
can provide them. to the
That'd be
committee.
something good for us to see. I did do a little bit of it. I took a look at, I believe it was Mandan's document, because I wanted to get just a sense for what else could be out there. I mean, I'll just throw this out as a point of discussion. Had I been on council, I think I would have had to take a pretty good look at the M building. And I think, Harold was talking about this a minute ago. The M building sits in every program we've got, right? It could get facade, it could get Renaissance Zone, it can get TIF. Like we're giving it every possible shot we can, and we're still not getting it there. You've got to, for me, that's the one building, there may be less than 5 in the whole city where I would say this is an icon of this city, right? So I think I would have had to have taken a very close look at that. But I will tell you where I would have had a really hard time with the TIFs. It's the other 2 projects. Okay, for one, brand new development on the edge of town, I got a real hard time using public funds to make that happen. Okay, in whatever format that they're bringing it. Really, the same thing with Blue on Broadway, and I would say Blue on Broadway is at least functioning and working, and it's done and all that stuff. At the same time, we'll tiptoe around a little bit of what is in common about these 3 properties, but the point of it is that the players involved in Blue on Broadway didn't need the public funds to get the project done. I'll just be blunt. And so, but because they fit the criteria and an approval came through the different, in this case, I guess just through the city because it was 5 years or less, that's the direction it went because I suppose it met the criteria. And so, again, this is another one where I wouldn't say that there's no reason to ever use it. I'm concerned as a council member because we're going to, even though all the right pieces are in place, hopefully we've got the right legal things with the M building, we are on the hook for the bonds. I think it's roughly $3 million in bonds that the taxpayer minded is on the hook for in the state that it's in or whatever state it becomes. And so this one's difficult. The other two projects I would have had a hard time backing. Yeah, Tyler.
Just a question for Mr. Billingsley. On Blue on Broadway, did they end up updating public infrastructure? Is that why wasn't there some public infrastructure? A road they updated or something like that?
Over
That
going
was
Broadway,
the
yeah.
project, right? I mean, it was the street
It
behind it.
was the street
Yep.
behind it was,
Street right
that's-
here.
that street right there is what the
Yeah.
TIF funded.
Correct. That's my point of clarification was that money went towards updating public infrastructure, not necessarily the project itself, but.
Yep. But at the same time, absent the program, if they wanted to build that, would we have asked them to do that? Because
Yes.
they would have needed the infrastructure.
That was a
correct?
requirement, because they were not taking access to their business off of Broadway. We didn't want to put a driveway on Broadway. That would have been too dangerous to have all that traffic going in and out of that building on Broadway. We wanted them to take access off of the street behind it. The street behind the building looked like an alley. It didn't look like a public street. It's designated as a public street, but we wanted it to actually be a functional street rather than an alley. Because of the traffic that the traffic demand that we're gonna place on that street, we needed to upgrade that street to meet city specifications. So a requirement that the city engineer placed on the developer was to upgrade that street to meet city requirements. And that's when the developer said, I need the help. This is gonna kill my project if I don't get a TIF to help out with this. So that's why we facilitated the TIF district to help the developer fund this requirement of the city engineer.
Sure. Paul?
Just wanted to, Member Hammer's question, 2021, the assessed value the sale amount was 525,000, which I think was somewhat close to what the assessed value was on the M building, according to the city's assessor's website, so.
So, thank you, Paul.
Okay. Other Beth? Yep.
Blue on Broadway was also a part of the City of Minot's national disaster resiliency requirements, correct? It was part of the low-income housing requirement, and that was a big part of working with this developer as well, was to accomplish that which was necessary for the city to receive funds, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Other questions for Brian on TIF? Okay, I think Brian, is there more discussion now? So I guess my question now becomes, again, same thing as before. What bullets do we want to at least write down now while it's fresh in our minds that we don't want to lose later? Tyler?
Oh.
Yep. Justin? Yeah.
I guess I'd echo I guess, as far as a bullet point on the TIF, it would be, I think you bring up a good point on the Big M building. I think it's pretty hard for someone to argue that should not have been part of the TIF program. I mean, but I'd also agree those two other projects, I'd really had some questions on whether that should be approved or not. So I don't know how the best way to word it, but I think the Big M building makes a lot of sense. The other buildings, I have a tough time knowing that my tax dollars are being spent on that, or they're saving property tax money value on that. So like I said, I don't know how the best way to word that would be, I don't know what the requirements need to be
Yeah.
on those, but it's, I don't know if there can be requirements, I don't know, but that's.
I think the obvious one that's already in the program, and I've seen in others, is we could propose that it just be blighted properties. I mean, that's, new development to me is a hard lift for the taxpayer to participate in. Okay, but a blighted property, I think it's worth discussion at that point, right? Is it something that could be salvaged, and is this a method to get there? I think it's worth that discussion. And just to add to that, I mentioned this when I talked about it before, but one of the reasons I had a hard time, even as those other projects went through the process, at the time I was working as property manager. Okay, so I'm working with owners of apartment properties across town. Justin, this is your business. So as I look at that, I'm working with property owners that had put their heart and soul and dollars and investment and everything into building during the boom. They took their shot, right? They put that money out there. They built those properties all across this city. And then we've got others that are coming in to enter that market using public funds to prop them up and help them get over the hump. That's a tough sell for the rest of those property owners that did it themselves and got that done on using their own dollars and took the chance, especially knowing that a lot of them were looking for $1,300 rents and we're now getting $850 after the boom busted, right? So that's a difficult pill to swallow for those people that put their money where their mouth is to actually go build something. And so I think your thought, and did you get that, Michaela? I think the way that I would put it down is, should we consider just blighted properties as opposed to new development? Okay, Paul.
Again, I just, first thought is, I agree, right? And I think whether it's public input, public hearings on these, but again, the tracks could have been built without a TIF, absolutely. But it doesn't have the public amenities. And I'm not saying that they're right or wrong, but, we have something, and I don't want to be careful how much you want to speak to this, but like, we represented a council from the parks coming that we want to build turf, right? What if there's a developer that comes and says, I want to build this, I see this as a community need, and I can provide this in the form of a TIF, and I can build a development, and I can include this as part of that, and make those types of community needs and fulfill those types of community needs in a new development through these programs. Is that the right way to do it? I don't know. But I'm saying is, I don't want to rule out those programs by saying these are available only to blighted properties either. Because again, the tracks could get built, it would just be 7 apartment buildings in a corridor of Minot, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but then you lose out on the public amenities, the public benefit, and should that or be in there? That's what we do at the council level. And again, having and eliciting that public input, we talk about it at council, and you can put it on every channel you want. You can put it in the newspaper. You can put it on Facebook and YouTube and all these, and people still don't pay attention to the meetings until they read a headline somewhere. So I get it, but trying to elicit as much public input throughout that process is important as well.
Yep. So to your point, there is an argument that says, don't limit what we see at the council, right? There is that argument. Now, I'll sort of play devil's advocate on it though, because as I mentioned before, in the Renaissance Zone world, my assumption is by the time it's to us, it's met every requirement. And I really don't have any reason to say no based on my gut feel about how good someone's going to deliver on the project or any of that. To me, if staff has said it meets the requirements, it's a yes. Now, and maybe that's how it's been. I've been here for a TIF. Maybe there's a ton of more thought that needs to go into that, and gut feel about, do we think this is going to be a net win for the people of the city? I don't know, because that's what that does. If you leave that discretion at the council, it says we choose whether it's okay.
And again, I don't want to, and I agree with that. And just to having gone through the process, especially on the tracks, that was months and months and months and months of work of regularly meeting with developers and city staff, and I was able to sit in on most of those meetings, electronically and listen to those conversations and try to vet out those things and those benefits and go through those. But I don't want to take up all the time for Dave.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just wanted to point out, you are correct, the in-building, there was a blighted property. The funding that the TIF supported in that building was for the abatement of the asbestos that was in the building. The other two projects that you talked about, the TIF proceeds were used to fund the public improvements. So Blue on Broadway was the street, curb, gutter, storm sewer, water, and sewer pavement, all of that thing. In the tracks, it's the public improvements in the entertainment or the event space is what the TIF was funding. So lacking those public improvements, I don't think that they would have been considered for a TIF.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for that clarification too. I was just going to ask that question to go back to look at the Big M because like to what you were saying about having to consider the Big M building, I'm not on the council. I'm not elected. That's probably for the best. But if I was, I would be looking at it to the fact that, okay, we're going to spend however much we had to spend to get the asbestos out of the building, whether we do it through a TIF or whether it comes back on the taxpayer roll or tax rolls through a foreclosure. On back taxes, and then we're going to have to spend it to get it up to code to get it moved anyways. And that was one of the things that when I got my battlefield promotion to the chair of the Magic Fund Committee, when Trinity came up in the forefront, they got an $11 million asset retirement obligation on their audited financials for asbestos replacement, same type of difference. And this is one of those deals that yeah, the taxpayer's going to get stuck with it one way or the other is what it kind of feels like to me.
Yeah, and so, I think of the program a little bit as a real surgical tool. This one in particular is a place where, depending upon the makeup of the council and the project, there could be a reason that I could see getting to that. For me, it might be very, very rare. Paul, it just might be very rare. So I think there's some differences there. But David, while I've got you, can you just give us an update on where we're at with that? Did I say that right? We bonded a portion of what we did for that work. We are on the hook for that, and we're going to take care of that. But have we seen any movement? Is there anything new to share on the M building and where that sits today?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I did have a phone call with an attorney representing a group that is working, or I believe the attorney is representing the Board of Governors for the M building. So just in the last few days, they're working on a program. A lot of moving pieces with that, so they were looking for some details in regards to the agreements that the city had in place and some of the details surrounding that. So I know that they are working on putting together, a proposal or keeping that project moving.
Great. Yep. Other questions? Yeah.
If I can add to that, again, we paid for asbestos removal. And as far as we know and have confirmed, all the asbestos is out. So what we paid for is complete. And so as long as they pay their property taxes in accordance with the minimum assessment agreement, they're complying, and the taxpayers of Minot are protected by the way that we designed this agreement. So ultimately, it's the developer who's suffering the pain of they haven't done the improvements to capitalize to make sure that it's a building worth $14.7 million, but that's their responsibility. That's why we structured it that way, so the taxpayers don't get left holding the bag on that. So, we've been trying to bring some lessons learned of TIF across the country to make sure that we're not repeating mistakes that other communities have made, where the developer gets what they want, and it's the taxpayers that end up paying and suffering and not getting the benefit that they're paying for. So we've been very intentional with that. I'd also add to this that through this process with the M building, we also had an analysis done by the PFM group to document that without these funds being applied, that the project wouldn't be able to be done on its own. That it was a make or break deal with regards to the project proceeding with or without these funds, and that the amounts was appropriate, and that the plan that was presented to us was realistic in the numbers and the value and the potential revenues that would make and those kinds of things, that we weren't just being fed a pipe dream that had no basis in reality. So we went through those efforts to try and protect those kinds of things. So I just wanted to add that.
And so with that in mind, I like that. I think that's all the protections that we would want in place. The one thing that maybe that wasn't able to foresee was that the entire structure of the backing was just gone, right? I mean, that's really the issue. The project itself made sense. It penciled out. Everything was there. But if the entity itself goes away, that's kind of the problem at the end of the day. But as you said, we don't know yet, right? Because they would have just gotten a tax bill now, just like the rest of us did. Hopefully that tax bill gets paid. And if it does, then we've kicked the can down the road, and we hope that each year continues that process, correct?
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, if they don't pay the taxes, and once they become 3 years delinquent, then the county would foreclose on the property. And the assumption is that there are lending institutions involved in this project as well that have an interest in not letting that happen either. So I would say the risk of that is probably pretty slim. And ultimately, the real risk would be is if they didn't pay the taxes, the county foreclosed, and it sat there, and nothing ever happened to the building, and it was never completed would be the risk. I think where we were before this project started, the taxes were 2 years delinquent already. It was valued at $473,000. And we were nearing the point where the county was going to foreclose on that property, and then we would have had the cost to, the taxpayers of Ward County would have had the cost to presumably demolish that or do something to abate the nuisance anyway.
Yeah.
So in this case, with it being a blighted building, I think we can make the argument that maybe we would have incurred some of that cost either way, either through the TIF or through some other type of abatement process.
Right. And again, that, that's why in my mind, this fits one of the ones that I'd really want to take a look at for me. Because I think that's a place where we can bring some value to that process to try to avoid a bad outcome, especially for an iconic structure. And you contrast that with what we may end up in a situation with the Trinity buildings, where I may not call that iconic. I mean, it's an important part of Minot's past, but you're in a whole different world when you're talking about that one. So yeah, Jordan.
Yeah, and I think you, Mr. Lakefield, I think you kind of stole some of my thunder, thankfully. Just with what I was going to say as far as there are going to be interested parties, it's probably not as simple as just saying they're not going to pay their property taxes for 3 years and it's going to come back to the city, like through the county foreclosure process. There will be a lot of steps that I'm thankful that I'm not going to have to be a part of personally. But, the one thing I will say to that is, and I don't know the particulars, and again, I'm thankful I don't, I have, through experience, had experience with properties that I would, in banking, call negative collateral values, meaning I can't give it away for what I need to put into it. And that has been my concern with the Big M building. That is my concern with Trinity. As a citizen, and only a citizen, again, probably thankfully, but I see what we're doing here, and I'm, obviously you have a building that was the outcome was bad going into all of this, right? Like it was sitting, not being used and everything else. And it kind of just appears to me like, we did the TIF to make sure, or to with the hope that this building could be lifted into a good outcome. And if it didn't end up in a good outcome, then we were where we were anyways and probably needed to be regardless. Like getting this thing, you can't just knock it down, because you can't knock it down when it's got asbestos in it. I've learned that lesson. You're going to have to remediate it. Somebody's going to have to remediate it. And, if it didn't get sold and financed and, maybe there wasn't any debt against it, and then it would come back to the city, and then the city's on the hook for it, and it's not good anyway. So I'm with you. I get why it needs to be done. But then speaking back to when I talk about priorities, is this more important for the city than some of these other programs? That's for the council probably ultimately to decide, but I mean, it's not important because you're kind of locked into it no matter what, the way I look at
Well,
it.
and one of the things, a little bit to your point, Jordan, that we want to keep in mind as we go through this, some of the programs we have are using dollars from the 2.1
Yes.
million. Others are sort of opportunity cost against what the property is going to
You're right.
eventually bring, right? So there's different pieces of this as we go. They all, in the end, have an impact on the taxpayer, right? I mean, whether it's we're trying to raise the tax base or whatever mechanism we're using, they all have different mechanisms. And so we have to kind of think of those slightly differently. When I do like the idea of towards the end saying, oh, okay, of the 2.1, what's our thought on how to break that up? But
Right.
that's different than the property tax, abatement side of things. So Paul.
No, again, I just wanted to, Jordan hit on it. He came back around to it again. If this property comes back to us on back taxes, prior to this program, even if we want to tear the building down, like Jordan said, you've got a big
Yep.
lift on taxpayer dollars on top of a multi-million-dollar investment and just turning it into an empty lot. To that point, and again, something that's kind of stuck with me is the concept of, and again, hope this lands, is failing forward, right? We had this project. Is it the outcome that we were promised? No. Is it the outcome we wanted? No. But we're in a heck of a lot better position with that building than we were 2-3 years ago, because now we have a building that's had the asbestos remediated. We have an assessment value of $14.7 million that's coming into the city. Taxable revenue that's generating. That's taking the burden off of other taxpayers. So again, is it the perfect outcome? No. But is it dead in the water? Hopefully not forever. hopefully somebody can come in and the city can work. And again, I just want to take another opportunity to tip my hat to staff, to Dave and to Harold and to the legal department on crafting these agreements with these developers that protect citizens and taxpayers. Because at the end of the day, that is the goal with these programs, is to make sure taxpayers are protected to the best that they can be. And it's an investment. Like there's going to be skinny, there's going to be risk. I get that. But again, I want to just be on the record of commending staff in crafting these agreements to protect citizens and the city as much as possible. So.
Well, good. Well, we're at a good spot. Is there any other bullets we want to get down on TIF? Yeah, Tyler.
Oh, nothing on TIF.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
just have the one, right?
Yep. And what was that? Just considering
Consider
whether.
blighted properties only and removing.
Yep.
the
And I
no.
think we'll come back to that and talk that through a little bit more. But one thing I did just want to point out about the 3 projects, just to be clear, while I might have voted different when they came up, I do feel like staff put us in a really good spot, because my understanding is on the tracks, we've only really dealt with what that first building is, and each piece came with each new piece of the puzzle. And so there really isn't new risk that's sitting there. It's really just what's already come. The one for Blue on Broadway is complete, and we have a street for it on the backside of that building. Again, I might have voted different, but it worked. The project is done, and we've got the infrastructure that we were looking for. The M building we know is open, and we don't know where that's going to end. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Harold, but I think that part of it has worked well. We've constructed that so it works.
Yeah, I was just gonna say with the tracks, we intentionally, even though maybe is what was desired, we didn't just TIF everything right up front and then let them get the benefits from that and then not deliver, and then we get left holding the bag, which I've seen multiple communities do. It was phased to help minimize that risk going forward, and unfortunately, that proved to be a smart move. Yeah.
Exactly. So Brian, if I could ask you, do you know for next time what you believe you have remaining?
So, Mr. Chairman, I have retail recruitment, new housing construction program, developer training. I want to briefly discuss the new land development ordinance that we have as well, and talk real quick about the development review team, and that's it. So these are going to be much quicker presentations. I'm
Yep.
confident we can get through them at the next meeting.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, so the only last thing that I wanted to ask the committee about, in our upcoming meeting dates, right now, we're scheduled the 10th and 24th of January, which again, what we're doing is we're following the Friday of council weeks is what is kind of been the schedule. I guess I wouldn't mind extending that out just so people can plan. Is this frequency working for everybody? You know, Beth, I know your conflicts and we'll do what we can do, right? And so I guess for the rest is, should we continue that? Should we add on, I would say at this point, February and March to those and just at least set those so we know what's coming? Is everybody agreeable to that? Time's been okay?
Yeah. Do we
I
need to
agree,
pivot
yep.
on the 10th for any,
Okay.
do we need to pivot on the 10th for anybody's schedules? Is there some schedule conflicts, Beth?
No, just because I have to go to Bismarck so much.
She'll be in
Oh,
Bismarck.
for
So I'm-
session. Oh, for session.
Yeah, I'm kind of tough. I'm actually really glad we brought it up because I had imagined that it was on the 17th, but I know that the city council the next Monday has reports, so everything looks great for schedule wise.
Perfect. Okay, so if everybody's agreeable to that, we'll add February and March at this point, and we'll continue. So next time we'll have Brian. Anything else that anybody wants to add before we adjourn today? Yeah. Harold.
If I may, just a suggestion that may be helpful, and maybe at some point we as a committee can talk about this too. And I would invite or suggest that maybe everyone on this committee go find a community that you feel like is being very successful in economic development, that you would like to have us accomplish here as well. And then how are they accomplishing that? What's their philosophy? What are the tools they're bringing to the table? How are they doing that? Because I'd be interested to compare notes of that versus what we're discussing here today. And I would definitely love and welcome any examples you can give me of communities that are moving the ball successfully that aren't using tools like TIF and those kinds of things. Because I would be more than happy to learn that and see that. But I think that would be helpful for us as a group to discuss that also.
Yeah. And short of picking us up and dropping us on the ocean, I mean, we've got some advantages that others might have. So, all right, anything else for anybody? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, sounds good. We are
Who
adjourned.
moved it
Thank-
and who seconded it?
Have the motion. and all.